What's going on, champions? Welcome to another episode of the Perspektiv podcast. I am 𝗣𝗲𝗿𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀 season 2, episode 7 of Where We Tune the Heart of Mentorship. Let's go. Oh, I almost forgot.
Yeah. I saw the hands.
I was like, But hey, don't forget, make sure you like, comment, subscribe, and most importantly, share the content with the world, because we're trying to make the world a better place, you know. Today is a special day. This is the 7th episode. So that means this is the last episode of season 2, which has been phenomenal, full of champions all across Canada and actually all across the globe. We had somebody from Germany. I forgot.
Somebody from the States too.
Somebody from the States too. Let's go. International. Let's go. Not just Canada. Let's go. So today we have a special guest, you know, episode 7, no pressure. But episode 7, it's been a great season so far. And I think we're going to end off on a high note. We got Lee Anna Osei, who I'm going to give you a quick backstory to. Lee she's a coach at St. Francis Xavier University, but Lee also has the same last name as me. She's an Osei, so you know she's great. Just saying. Anyways, so Lee gets a job at St. FX, and as everybody knows, I'm a graduate of St. Francis Xavier University. And about I think Lee, when was it, like 3-4 years ago? You got a job there? Yeah, I started getting messages from profs and like people associated with the football team that, hey, do you have a sister or a cousin that just got a job at St. FX? I'm like, no. No. And then everybody's like, yeah, we just got this new basketball coach and she has the same last name as you and she's pretty much like you. I'm like, okay, maybe because she's black and she has the same last name, but okay, yeah, cool. And then I get a message from a guy I really respect, my OG, Richard Johnson, and he hits me up and he tells me, Kwame, I think you should reach out to the new women's basketball coach. I was like, yeah, I've heard about her. He's like, yeah, like she's really cool. She's from Jane of Finch. You know, she has an amazing story, and I think you'd really connect with her. So I was like, all right, you know, I respect Richard. So I hit her up, contacted her. We started talking, and you know what? Prior to that, everybody said we were brothers, thought we were brother and sister, but now literally she is my sister. Every time she has some great news, every time she achieves something, like I'm celebrating like it's myself because I'm so proud of her, and we have that connection now, and. Yeah.
So the plot twist is Kwame was adopted and she actually is his sister.
Exactly. I found out after that we actually are related. But we got Lee Anna Osei on deck today to share her perspective, share her stories with us on the Perspektiv podcast. Lee, welcome to the show. Great to have you. Tell us a bit about yourself real quick.
Thank you so much, guys, for having me. And Kwame, just much respect to you. You're like my brother. I know we met each other 3 years ago, but literally it feels like I've known you my whole life. And awesome to be on here with you guys. So I'm currently, I'm tuning in from home because I'm in Nova Scotia and we're in lockdown. But unlike much of the world, like we didn't get hit with the first or second wave. So this is really our first time going through this since COVID has started. And it's been quite a journey the last year. So I'm a former basketball player turned into a coach. I started my playing career in the Greater Toronto area. I played for grassroots.
Laurier, right?
I played at Laurier University. Before that,
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no.
I'll be quiet now.
No,
let her tell her story.
No, you don't have to be quiet. But no, I just, I love basketball, and growing up, it was basketball or it was things that weren't so positive, and so I really was attracted to just what everything sports was able to do for me, and mainly connect me with people that were like-minded. I was encouraged by coaches that, education and sports could really get me to a place where I could support myself and support my family. And then I was fortunate enough to just play on some really amazing teams growing up. I went to Eastern Commerce, downtown Toronto, which for a long time was just heralded as, like just a great sport and academic school. And then I got a scholarship to University of Miami. So I was in the States for a few years.
The U.
Let's
go.
a little bit over a year, and then I was at a school in Texas as well. And then I came back home. I took a gap year, which maybe we might get into, maybe we might not. And then I started my youth sport career in my third season, and that was one of the best decisions I ever made, still to this day. So shout out my Golden Hawk family, and I was able to do a master's after that as well. And then from a coaching standpoint, I've always known I wanted to be a coach. I mean, I was blessed and I worked really hard to be a good basketball player, but I had no aspirations of playing pro myself. I would love to be coaching in the NBA or the WNBA one day. But for now, I mean, I get to do what I love. And so when I took this job 3 years ago, I became the first Black female head coach, the first female coach here at CNFX, but the first Black female kind of in the Canadian Maritimes as a varsity basketball coach. So that came with a lot that I probably didn't think too much about at that time. But over the last 2 years, I know I've grown, I've become a better coach, I've become a better person, and it's been an awesome journey so far.
Wow. That's just a crazy resume. I'm just proud that you went to the U, and I can say I have a connection to the U now. So, but Lee, you're from the Jane and Finch area, and Jane and Finch is like known all across Canada. Everybody knows about Jane and Finch. When I was in Fort McMurray, the kids from Toronto claimed they were from Jane and Finch, just to be tough and whatnot.
Exposure.
It's one of those places, right, that everybody all across Canada knows, but they know it for all the wrong reasons. They know it for all the violence, the crime, the gangs, and all that stuff. That's what Jane and Finch is known for. And like when I think about it, just like Jane and Finch, Rexdale, all these Regent Park, all these areas. Whenever we speak about them in a negative narrative, in a negative connotation. So I'm trying to think, like, if I'm a kid growing up there and I constantly hear these things about where I'm from, it's pretty depressing, and it doesn't make me feel comfortable or make me feel proud to be from there. When in actuality, I don't think everything about these areas is bad. Everything about these areas is not bad. So I wanted to know, what is something positive that you could share with our audience, with the world, about growing up in Jane and Finch that most people probably wouldn't know?
Well, I think the community takes care of the community. When I was coming up, I had an eldest brother that lived with us in our area, and then I had a little sister coming up. But between family, friends, actual cousins, and people in the community, you always had people looking out for you. And for me specifically, that was the coaches in the area. Like I don't think we give them enough credit. And when you're growing up, you're just thinking, oh, like that's somebody who's nice, or that's somebody who maybe just likes sports. But really, they're thinking, hey, this is the next generation. We got to keep them out of trouble. We got to give them something to do. We got to, build some self-esteem in that young woman. We got to let her know that there's more to life than the struggle that we might be seeing every day. And so I think the single greatest thing that came out of my experience in living in the Jane and Finch community were the mentors that I was able to meet. And for me, that was all my coaches. My first coach was my principal at my local high school. And then in the connections area and the lane area, I had 3 or 4 coaches that just supported me academically and basketball wise. And, that was the place to be. So I didn't have to think about, was I going to be accepted? I was accepted. I remember doing raptor ball at Oakdale Community Center. And, I used to be mostly the only girl. Sometimes there might have been one other girl, but it wasn't strange. It wasn't foreign. I was like, okay, because we're just hoop heads. We just love basketball. Right. Mm-hmm. And so every Saturday morning, I look forward to that. And, it's interesting because when you're in it and when you're that young, like you just don't know, you're oblivious. Like you think it's normal to just wear hand-me-downs. Like in our culture, we had this company that we called like Coastline. And basically each year, like people from our community would commute to like this warehouse place and just get a bunch of hand-me-down clothes. And that was like our back to school shopping. But growing up in it, I was like, oh, okay, like this is just what it is. When we saw like police officers around and they would ask us questions, like we just thought, well, this is what it is. And so, when I would be in my bedroom and we see like cockroaches and spiders, we just, earwigs, we would just think this is how it is. And it wasn't until I really got out of the Jane and Finch community that I started to look at things differently. So I would also say, as much as it was obvious and apparent that, times were rough, I never felt like we were less than. And me and my friends never felt like that. And, when I was younger, I wouldn't say, hey, like I'm living in this kind of area, in this kind of area. And I think people respect it when you kind of come out of those areas, because they can't imagine, growing up in a community like that. But like you said, Kwame, there's a lot of good things that came from those communities and a lot of great people. And I know just in the basketball space, kids are dreaming now. You look at somebody like an Anthony Bennett who grew up in the Jane Finch area and ended up getting drafted in the NBA. I know tons of people that have just come from that, Jane strip, that have gone on and done amazing things. And so those are the people that I look up to.
Exactly. And as you were talking, I was thinking about there's a guy I know. His name is Curtis Carmichael. He used to go to Queen's University. Now he's an Olympian, and he's writing a book, and it's called The Butterflies in the Trenches. And he's from the Scarborough area, and he asked me to just read a little bit of a book. And as I was reading it, and I connect with what you just said to this, is that he just talks about how important the mud is for the butterflies to become butterflies, and the mud is growing up in Malvern, growing up in Jane and Finch, growing up in Rexdale. And to some people, mud is a bad thing. You don't want mud on your shoes. You don't want to step in mud. But mud is essential for the caterpillar to feed it. Mud is essential for the caterpillar to turn into the butterfly. So what we consider mud is actually our advantage. Some people might think it's a disadvantage, but it's our advantage, because through the mud, we turn our struggles into strength. We turn our struggles into a drive that can't be shaken. And we realize that in the end, you know what? The mud is essential to our growth. So growing up in an area that a lot of people think is bad and negative, you know what? It's given us a drive that can't even be compared to most people. Most people don't even understand it because they've never been through it. So I definitely connect with everything you just said.
I was also thinking too, just how you were talking about how growing up, certain things are normalized, and it's not until later in your life and you get out and you realize like, oh, maybe not everyone has that experience, or maybe this isn't normal. Everything you've been doing with women's basketball and everything you've been doing with BCCA, I got that acronym right, correct? BCCA, right? Yeah, okay. Everything you've been doing with that movement, at what point in your journey did you realize, hey, like there's not enough representation? And then part two of that question is like, at what point were you empowered to make a change? Because I think a lot of people, I mean, we've brought that up on this podcast like countless times, not enough representation. We've said it, but you're someone I see taking action on that. Like you're someone I see making change, not just talking about change. So I guess the question is like, when did you become aware like, hey, this is an issue? And what made you take action and actually like, because I scrolled through that whole thing and I was like, wow, this is, I think Kwame posted it back when he was speaking on something like maybe like 2-3 months ago. And then that was the first time I really got like tuned into that page. But yeah, like how did that start? And like, where did that come from?
Sure. So I kind of identify two turning points in my life. The first is when I came back from the States. So I started my coaching career while I was at Eastern, and I coached boys basketball. And I had mentioned that a lot of my mentors were in the Jane and Finch community, like Coach Will Russell, Devin Brown, Donovan Gordon. And when I was coaching boys, a lot of people were like, whoa, like, hold on, like, what's going, like, you're the coach? Like, you're coaching U17 in the Jane and Finch tournament? Like, and it was like foreign to them, but it was still specific to me. And I had always kind of like just naturally, I mean, I was always an oddball. I was always the girl running around with the guy. So that didn't mean much to me. So I found a turning point was when I went to the States and came back, I had a lot of young boys and young girls that were looking for support. How do I go through this recruitment process? Can you help me with my skill development? Can you connect me with sport coaches? Even other immigrant families, especially for the girls, their families not understanding what are the benefits of playing sports, you know, recreationally at all, because that was a challenge that I had coming up. So in 2012, when I came back, I had to work, and so I didn't actually go to school right away. And the agreement I made with my mother was if I was going to work, and I was working some real sketchy jobs just to try to help make ends meet, that I would be able to do a lot in the basketball community outside of the work. So I was working graveyard shifts from like 9 to 9, and then during the daytime and during the weekends, we were doing a lot for women's basketball. And at the time, I was writing for North Pole Hoops. I was doing some town identification for Ontario basketball, and it was all good because I was still in these sectors. But I was like, man, like our girls get no love. And I was fortunate enough at Eastern Commerce that like we were one of the best teams the city has ever seen. Like we're the only inner Toronto city team to, you know, go to those out of town tournaments and beat them, and have a handful of players playing on the national team and going D1 and stuff like that. So we didn't lack for some of that attention because every year we were competing for championships, winning OFSA and doing all those kinds of things. But I was looking at the landscape overall and I was like, okay, there's nothing here. So I connected with a young girl named Monique Phillips. She actually was a daughter of one of my current coaches, Terrence Phillips. And we created a website. And, you know, I thought, you know, what could we call this? And so that was the beginning of CANLEATS, which is like Canadian Athletes. And, you know, since that point, about 9 years ago, we've been able to do everything from all girls camps, the first girls high school all-star game in Ontario, the first national girls prep school showcase. Like we just did things that were different and people hadn't seen before. Nobody was seeing girls highlight videos. Nobody was getting play-by-plays on Twitter. You know, there's a league called the Jewel League of Ontario, and I remember I started working with them just to really push it. I created the recruitment guides that went out to college coaches. And so that was a big turning point because I felt like, wow, you know, for so long I've been focused on my academics firstly, and then my own basketball development. But taking a step outside the phase really, like it was like, you know, a veil had been lifted. So that was the beginning of really like a lot of my gender advocacy. And I'm still heavily involved on the guy side. I mean, every time I'm home, like if I was home right now, I probably would be coaching at Crestwood Prep or something like that. We got a lot of really good guys that came through our program and went on to the NBA. But the work on the women's side, I think, really laid a strong foundation. The second turning point was when I took the job at St. FX. So the year before that, I was employed as a den parent and a full-time basketball coach at a prep school in Brantford, Ontario called TRC. And that was incredible because we were like, you know, we had the best team in the country. We were traveling on visits to US schools. You know, I'm talking to big time Division I coaches. It was a great experience, program development and the whole nine. But when I took the St. FX job, I was like, okay, this is a huge jump. Like I'm going from coaching high school athletes that are really talented nonetheless, but you know, now I'm in higher education. And I was always passionate about higher education because I always consider myself an educator and an academic first. And I love learning. I love professional development. But being here at St. FX, I really started to look at things differently. And I was like, you know, I think one of the first things that kind of hit me like a rude awakening was like within my first week or two of taking my job, I had players talking about how scary I looked and how scary I talked, and that they never had a Black coach before. And I'm you know, I grew up in an area where everyone was a person of color. You know, like there was a couple years I was in Vaughan, but other than that, even when I was in the States, I'm seeing a lot of people that look like me. So it caused me to pause and be like, whoa, I've never considered this before. I knew I was coming in to roll my sleeves up and turn a program around, but I wasn't expecting this. And I think the beginning of that really had a snowball effect because it's also a challenge when you come in to quote unquote rebuild a program. You know, people are leaving. Like that's kind of how it works. And so I became vilified in a sense. So everything I did was too hard. It was scary. It was, you know, too much for the girls. It was, you know, and for me, like, I always think about access to sport as a privilege, right? So if you're doing something, first of all, if your safety is at risk, you shouldn't be doing it. If you're not happy, you definitely shouldn't be doing it. And that's kind of my mindset for almost anything, right? It's like, I go back to that agency piece. But I went through an experience in my first year that was rooted in racial discrimination. And part of it was probably because I was young. part of it was probably because I was, you know, deemed an outsider, but it was a terrible experience. It had me in a dark, 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 dark place. And you know, if it wasn't for my faith, I don't know how I would have came out to that standpoint. And if it wasn't for like the hundreds and hundreds of people that had advocated on my behalf, I don't know if I would still be working here. You know, like my athletic director, huge ally, people from back home. But after that point, I was like, I hope to God nobody ever has to go through what I went through, where I'm sitting there like, this is racism. You know, like this just doesn't make any sense. And I started to do a lot of research. Like I did a master's of arts in history, and I love just diving for resources. But that was a huge turning point for me, because I was like, is this how it looks like for people of color in these kind of leadership positions? And you know, I found out that yeah, unfortunately, this is what it looks like. And I was fortunate because people kind of stood up for me and spoke out against like just things that were wrong and false allegations and all that kind of stuff. So the BCCA, like the inception of that really started like with a terrible experience in my first year. And I talk a lot about responding to situations. And my response was, you know what, I might not know what the end product is, but let me just do a lot of research and start to gather some stuff, right? And start to look around. And then with the onset of COVID and a lot of the racial discrimination and violence that we saw last year, it just seemed like a perfect time. And really, the push came from a lot of my mentors and other coaches that like, let's be intentional about creating our own space, and we'll work with our allies, we'll work with our supporters, but we need more celebration and honoring, and less, you know, perpetrating these negative stereotypes about Black people. We need to bring together our allies and carve out a space where we can work together, right? Instead of wondering who's doing what and what's going where. And then networking was the other thing we were really passionate about. And obviously, you guys have seen through this whole year, everything's gone virtual. So now we have no excuse not to be able to, you know, look out for a friend of ours or a colleague of ours or a brother or sister. And so it's been an incredible journey with the BCCA, because so much has happened in less than a year. I think next month is our 1 year. But you know, I just feel like with those two changes, one, take a pause on my own student athlete career, and the second being when I experienced kind of what it means to be, you know, the first and the only, and you're also an outsider. It wasn't a good experience at all, and I'm hoping that nobody ever has to go through that again.
Yeah, that's and I think that's kind of back to what Kwame was saying about like the mud, kind of like, I mean, you had such a negative experience with a certain thing, but look what you turned it into. You know what I mean? You like flipped it into something. Sorry, Langma's a little loud over here. Your podcast, bro. Yeah, the second thing I was just gonna say was like, I'm an outsider working in a community also, and I find like sometimes I'll put myself in potentially compromising situations, but like what, bro, like you had a lot of people who kind of had your back on the situation, right? And I think that speaks to like your character and everything you were able to accomplish, and that's kind of what I say a lot of the time too, is like, you know, if there's a one-off situation, if you have a fallback of like, you know, 10, 20, 30, 40 people who can say like, nah, she's this, she's this, she's this. And often I'll find like, if there's 5 or 10 people saying the same thing, you know, where there's smoke, there's fire. But if it's a one-off and you got an army of people supporting you from the back end, that just speaks to like who you are and, you know, what you've done for everyone. All right, Izzy, go ahead. Cat's going in the basement.
It was distracting me too. I was like, huh. Well, off what Dylan even just said, I was just kind of taking in even what you said from the beginning, like even your beginnings to where you are today. A lot of our experiences and different challenges and just like new exposure to different environments that either you're the outsider or you're in it, but it's still brand new, of like a new community that you've never been in. I want to go back to your Laurier experience, because for me, was Laurier, just to ask, was that your first university you went through, like as for your schooling?
Or like overall?
Yeah.
No, so I had started in Canada, yes, but not overall.
Oh, okay.
That was like my third year of post-secondary schooling.
Okay. Because I was watching your video and one line that you had left, you're like, that Laurier was an experience for you. And if that was, going there was the experience that you got something out of it. So I just want to ask, like, what did Laurier's experience leave you with and leading you to like where you are today?
Man, my Laurier family, I mean, I can't even, it's hard to put into words. Like, so I actually had no intentions to go to Laurier. I have an older brother who unfortunately is no longer with us that graduated from Laurier. He didn't play any sports. He was very gifted and he graduated in the business department. But when I came back from the States, I was being encouraged by a lot of my mentors, including my brother. Okay, let's figure out what next year looks like academically. On one hand, I'm like, I'm almost ready to go entrepreneur mode because I'm at a level where between training, recruitment consulting, scouting databases, I'm like, there's a niche here. But then I really got that conversation that was like, listen, as a young Black female, that ain't, like, that's not going to cut it. And so I had always told Chantal Valet at Windsor, and at the time, Windsor was just like a powerhouse. They won like 5 championships in a row. They were like the only Canadian school I considered. I always said if I came back to Canada, I would go to Windsor. But that summer, my brother ended up passing away. And when he passed away, my family and I decided like Laurier would be a good fit. I still wasn't like even 100% that I would even be going to school just because everything was so tight. And I was talking to the pastor at my church and talking to my mom. But my mom begged me to go and finish my schooling and do it in honor of my brother and keep trying to elevate in the world. What really stood out to me about my Laurier family is the coach and I had been kind of contacting off and on. But at the end of the day, the man didn't know me. Most of the players on the team didn't know me. Some I played against, some I played with. There was one girl I actually did grow up with in the Jane Finch community. But at my brother's funeral, the whole squad rolled in. They drove from Waterloo to our church, Pentecost in West End, Toronto. And there was like a huge contingent of Laurier students and faculty that came. So it was like super overwhelming because we didn't expect that at all. We expected a letter, maybe a text, how you doing? So sorry to hear. And people came with my brother's, picture on the t-shirts, and it was so emotionally overwhelming. And then that's when I knew for sure, like this has to be my home. And really from that point onwards, from that summer, right up until I completed my playing career there, I've just had a tremendous amount of support. I've worked in the athletic department. We did some amazing things on the floor. We went to nationals. We were top 10 ranked. So really competitive as well. All of the teammates that I played with at Laurier had a positive impact on me. I still talk to about half of the players that I played with, like on a routine basis. I talk to the athletic director probably once a week, if not even more. I talk to my coach even more frequently than that. So, a lot of people say when you're selecting a university to go to, it's a 4 or 5 year decision. For Laurier, like my experience, that was a 45-year decision. Mm-hmm. I'm in a couple of years, I'm going to be 10 years removed, and there's no doubt in my mind that I'm still going to be connected to Laurier. They do a phenomenal job, I think, of engaging alumni. So I've been able to speak at like homecoming events. Actually, yesterday I was emailing one of the professors in business because she wants me to speak to the entrepreneurship class, like for a 3rd straight time. Nice. So I mean, I can't even put it into words, but it feels like I still go to Laurier. Like that's when it's real.
Mm-hmm. If you're still like living through, rocking their gear and still showing up there. That's awesome. That kind of actually just made me think of something really quick, because you talk about like that university, and it seems like a space that they created for all their students of just making sure they feel like their family. So what do you like when you do your engagements with people? What is like top 3 things in your mind that you're like, I want to foster this in the spaces that I'm in?
Well, firstly, I think it's about who the people are at the table, because as much as we want to see representation, we know it's not there. For example, in a U Sport level, we know there's 0 Black athletic directors, but really diversity of thought is really what we're fighting for, right? It's not to say we need yellow, green, brown, black, but but it's like we don't have the diversity of thought, and so we really need to look at lived experiences because we don't have people going above and beyond to attain that. And I think like that's something that I really tried to get across, is it's not about just saying give every Black person a job over a white person. Like that's not the mandate at all. But it's like we do need diversity of thought, and it starts with really critiquing the status quo. So like number one, if you're looking to make any change, are you humble enough? Do you have the deference enough to say, okay, this status quo obviously isn't working? A lot of these things we don't need large year-long race-based projects to show. Like I think if you did a pay audit, it would be very telling. I think if you did a student survey, it would be very telling. I think if you looked at who qualifies for AFAs and who doesn't, it'd be very telling. And I'm not saying that stuff is specific to Black people, but we don't really need to engage in a lot of, I guess, evidence-based stuff to know this is real. If you pick up a book, you know, I got a bunch of books I'm trying to read right now just to kind of get caught up myself. There's a lot of things you can do on your own without needing to be educated. So I think the first thing I look for is a sense of like, how are you trying to educate yourself as to this landscape and where we've fallen short? Because by definition, you're saying the status quo is not the standard that we want to abide by. We need to change that status quo, and we need to think about those marginalized voices and those marginalized people. And I think everything starts from there. Because if that first conversation is really about checking a box and I don't want to seem racist and well, let's make excuses for why things have been like this, you got to understand that it's not a one-person job. Like racism isn't perpetrated by one person. We're dealing in the 21st century here with something that is systemic and ingrained in a lot of organizations, institutions, and infrastructures. And that's the approach. So nobody is blaming you as an individual. And are we recognizing that? I think if we're on the same page about that, then the sky's the limit. Because now you can contextualize things to what can we do and what can't we do? Like, for example, St. FX has 4,000 students. You know, York University has 50,000. So you can imagine from any kind of initiative or project-based standpoint, it's like, it's going to be day and night, right? Funding is also a thing. But ultimately, the mindset of this is not working, we need to scrap it, and let's bring in people who are experts at this, right? And it could be, hey, maybe you're talking about sports and you're bringing in coaches, and you're bringing in former athletes, and you're bringing in pros like 𝗲𝗲𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀, right? Or maybe you're talking about policy and you're bringing in DEI experts. But that's just that's the way that we have to move, I really feel, in order to make any kind of progress. Because you can on paper have progress, and then it's the exact same system of oppression, right? And we really want to get away from that.
Awesome. I really like that. It would have stood out, like diversity of thought. That's the line
really
there for me. Yeah.
Because honestly, I don't even know if it would be bucking so much if it was diversity at the table, you know. And like if there was 10 white men that all brought a different perspective, and the challenge is if you don't have that lived experience, you got to get it somewhere else, either through education or through intentionality. And that's just not the norm, right? I'm not gonna pick up a science book if I'm not a science major, and that's not my forte. So, but that's really what we're pushing for. It's diversity of thought, right?
Awesome.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And as you're talking, I was just thinking, man, like if everybody could just understand that, like there would be so much more positive movement with this, you know. And one thing I struggle with, I wasn't even gonna ask this question, but as you're talking, I was just thinking, I'm just like, one thing I struggle with is like when I get approached by an organization or a school to come do a speech, and you know, I'll have like an intake meeting with the people, and sometimes like is this an internal battle, and I just feel like you don't really care. You're just doing this just to check the box. You know, you're just doing this just to say that you're doing it. You're doing this because you see that your student athletes or your students are doing more than you, so you want to make it look like you're doing something. So how do you deal with a situation like that, Lee? Like how do you maneuver? How do you move forward with that? Because that's something I struggle with personally.
Well, it's funny. I think part of it is based on your experience, but like those of us that are really bold are able to call it out. And then a lot of us are like, I don't want to offend. I don't want to make them uncomfortable. I don't want to burn a bridge, right? And I think based on who you are and what that background is, so for example, I know this last year, if anybody asked me to come and speak, about diversity and inclusion, my answer is yes right off the bat. I'm not really asking questions. But when I talk to, a friend of mine who is a sport and race and gender historian, and she gets asked that question, she ain't saying yes until you answer 5 of her own. Where are you coming from? What have you already done? Have you ever had a Black person come in to speak before? Follow up, why not? Why are you approaching me? Is there something that's, you know what I'm saying? Like, there's all these other questions. The second part of that, I would say, is there's a lot of people that mean well, and they feel like the first step is bringing in a person of color to speak to a class or something like that. But what gets me now is not trying to compensate that person. And I'm not saying, so for example, like I have 2 not-for-profit organizations. So if you're gonna talk about this change you want to have because you see where these barriers are and you want to motivate, don't ask Black people to do it for free. Like, all you're doing is perpetrating like the inequities that we're talking about. And oftentimes that person is coming from a place of power and privilege, right? And so it's like you mean well, but again, the attention is still not what people are able to objectively see, right? And so I found that over the last year and a half, like I've been trying to educate myself as much as possible, but I've become a little bit more emboldened to call that stuff out respectfully, like in a way that I can really explain why this is not really the right way to go about it. So I kind of see it as 2-tiered, but I definitely feel like, like Black people are very forgiving and we're always willing to help. We're always willing to work on stuff. Like I'm sold on that notion about us as people. But I do think like we're not helping if we don't push those buttons as well. At the very least, just to be inquisitive, to see where they're at, right? And so like with BCCA, we've been working with Football Canada for the last 6 or 7 months, and we're hoping to kind of launch something exciting in the near future. But there's been a lot of just talking about where the gaps are. There's been a lot of intentionality, and then there's other national sport organizations that aren't ready to have the conversation at all. And it's kind of crazy, just given the last year that we've had. Like, how could you like be an anti-racist, right? Like, you can't be ignorant. You can't be in a box because we've been exposed to this for the last half of the year. It's been a double pandemic for some of us. The last year and a half,
Facts.
right?
Facts.
So what does that say to your membership? What does that say about your mandate? Why do you have in your governance a diversity and inclusion policy if you're not willing to act on it, right? And I'm really hoping through the BCCA we can continue to, not, I hate saying call out, but pretty much call out organizations and individuals in those power positions and just question things and ask them for their rationale, right? I think there's a lot of people that are looking for support and guidance, and they're accustomed to knowing what those answers are. They're accustomed to knowing where to go, and it's difficult as a leader to admit, like, I missed this, like I messed up. And as a coach, like it's hard for me as a coach to do it. I'm always trying to find ways just to show my players I'm not perfect. I don't know everything that I'm doing. Like, we just got to figure this out. But, I just think there's something interesting there because a lot of our leaders are people who are experienced, they're educated, but it's like the diversity and inclusion lens as it relates to racialized violence has just not been there. Right? So are they willing to have the same growth mindset that they promote?
Have you dealt with any of your players, maybe during this past year or even prior? I find a lot of the white players who might not want to approach Kwame with certain questions because I don't know if they don't want to offend or they're not whatever. And it usually starts off the same. It's like, so like my dad said this and I was wondering, you know what I mean? They're like trying to come at it like at an angle. But so I end up fielding like a lot of those questions like during this past year. But how do you deal with that kind of stuff? And maybe you haven't, but how do you deal with like a smaller team, I guess, because I'm smaller. I'm talking from a football perspective because you got like 17, 18 players, something like that. So do you end up like having to field a lot of those questions from your players, and like how do you deal with that?
I think as it relates to the last year, it's been an interesting one. And honestly, so part of what you want to be as a coach is you want to be willing to meet people where they're at. So like one of the things I didn't do, as much as people might have assumed, like just because I've been out there like the last year or so, I wasn't like, yo, like let's jump on the Zoom, we're having this conversation, we're gonna make this uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Because I just didn't feel like it would have been fair for me to do that. I think each of my athletes, and they range from 17 years old to like 23, 24, I actually just allowed space for them to like prompt and come to me with those questions or any comments. And you know, some haven't. Some haven't. They've they've marched alongside their friends and they've reposted things, but it's just not the level of comfortability that they have. And then we have other athletes that are like, coach, look at this. Coach, look at this. Coach, call this out. Coach, you know what I mean? And so I I just think as a coach, I'm in a little bit of a different position because I don't want to break that trust. I don't want to come at them too hard and then I'm pushing them away. And often it is those people who aren't coming from that kind of background where they're, you know, it's been tough socioeconomically. You know, they, you know, got two parents at home. They, you know, they haven't really dealt with tragedy. And I think, you know, it's different for everyone, but at the athletes that I have and the school that we have, I don't think that would have been the best thing for me to do. And so I've just been kind of navigating that here and there. The good thing though is when we've created initiatives or opportunities to have those conversations, I think they've been good because that's when the questions have come. So in terms of contact to me personally, I leave that to the players to take the first step. And I'll kind of, you know, as a coach, hey, if anybody wants to talk and that sort of thing. But I wait till they take that first step because you never know. I also think part of it is because subconsciously, I know that I've already dealt with players who are inherently players and parents who are inherently biased and prejudiced, and have stereotypes about Black people, about young people, about women. And so I also feel like it's red tape for me because I could be in the HR's office tomorrow just answering a question about, well, are you telling this person that they have to have this political stance? You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
I
yeah,
don't
yeah.
know if that's just a state effects thing, but that's what my experience also has been the last 3 years. So I kind of have to be careful about that. And, you know, I try to just keep a lot of my BCCA stuff, like, you know, really it's my personal opinions and my voice. And then meeting my players where they're at, should they want to have that conversation.
Yeah, we had this group, I don't know, maybe like 4 years ago. It was called Community Helpers. It was with a bunch of the football players, and it turned like it was supposed to be about like a suicide support group and like da 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 da, but it turned into like the Me Too movement was kind of like pushing hard at that point, and the topic of one meeting we had, they were like an hour at lunch, and it kind of turned into that discussion. And it was cool to see the players interacting where I was kind of like facilitating a healthy conversation. But yeah, a lot of the players had like certain opinions, and then it then turned into like there was some of the players who were like, well, you haven't seen it, but you know, I have to deal with racism at the school every day. You never saw that. And then you saw their minds just being like, wait, what? Like it got their world blown open, but it was because of like it was coming from their friends, from their peers. And I didn't have to say anything. I just sat back and like let the whole thing unfold. And it was really cool. I don't know if you can really replicate that, but I've been trying to think of ways how I can, you know, make that sort of like space, like safe space where you can have these conversations in a safe space. But yeah, dope. Thanks.
I think the one thing that's been unique for us is like, so we had the most in-class offerings at St. FX. So we were full on in person, where a lot of Canadian universities were online or half. And so for a lot of us, like it was business as usual. But like we actually dealt with a lot of incidences just related to Black Lives Matter and statements and, you know, some bullying. And, you know, it was really tough to kind of navigate. And I commend our school for how they've responded in terms of creating a platform for Black students and Black voices. There's a lot of work to do, obviously, just like probably every other Canadian university. But that's where it starts from, right? Are we going to be doers, or are we going to, again, that status quo thing, right?
I actually had to take my mic off because my dog is snoring and I started to hear a snoring happening. And I'm like, who's there? And I'm like, whoa, this mic's picking up on the sound. So I was trying to nudge him, but he's not waking up. So you can go call me. You can...
Okay, I got one more question before that.
Sorry,
that's why I was muted this whole time.
Yo, it's like an animal farm. We got cats, dogs, and
I really want a pet, man. I'm so jealous. I've been wanting a pet for the last 3 years.
Yo, get a cat.
Don't get a cat.
I really
Don't get a
want
cat.
A puppy,
get a dog.
But when we're in season, I wouldn't be able to. And now my assistant coach has 2 cats, and I'm really thinking about it because they're starting to rub off on me. But I still think the small.
Yo,
dog.
call me. We'll talk. We'll talk later.
This guy has 2 cats.
3.
3?
3?
Yeah.
Don't tell me you count the dog as a cat.
I've been having 3 this whole quarantine.
You had 3 this whole time?
Yeah, where you been?
When did you get the third one?
When one died, and then I bought 2 more.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I only see the gray one. How come the gray one always likes disturbing the podcast? It's always the gray one.
She's just attention hog, yo.
Yeah. Lee, I got 2 questions. I'm gonna ask the first one right now. You've dealt with pain and tragedy. You dealt with tragedy in your life, which has caused pain. And we deal with a lot of kids and young adults and even adults who, when they go through something hard or they go through a tragic experience, they harden and they don't want to move forward and they just want to give up on things. And they kind of use that moment of pain as an excuse, as a reason not to move forward. And they blame everything on that. And you went through a period where you lost a sibling, which is like one of the most tragic things to experience. To lose somebody of your own flesh and blood, somebody that you've known all your life. To lose that person is not easy, and it hurts. But you found a way to move forward, to embrace that pain and turn it into something positive. And I know you said at your funeral, your team came and supported you, and that's how you knew you wanted to play for Laurier. But how did you move forward from that initial moment, initial experience of pain and heartache? How did you move forward, and how did you turn it into something positive?
Well, I think the irony about the situation was, so my brother was the most accomplished person in our family, and my mother had taken out a lot of loans, like a line of credit to kind of help them through school and stuff. And when he passed away, we had to file for bankruptcy. So our family literally split apart. But in another breath, my brother's passing actually brought my family together. And so as much as we didn't have a place like to call our own, and we were living in different spots, and I went off to school, my sister stayed with someone, and my mom rented a bedroom from a friend at church. I think it really did bring our family together. And then a few years later, we actually were able to get a home now, which we have in 𝗣𝗲𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀. So I think the fact that our family became closer, and in high school and stuff, I don't know if I'd mentioned, but because I wasn't supported in my athletic journey, and I had some issues at home, I bounced around a lot. So like, I would say I probably lived in no less than 6 or 7 places throughout high school. And I spent like 1 year at home, maybe. And when I went off to the States, like, I think my mom and my aunt dropped me off, but I hadn't been living at home for a while. And so my brother's passing really was a sort of catalyst to just help us understand how important family was, and that, at any time something could happen, and it was really hurt. Like, I guess what's really hurtful too is it's not like my brother, knock on wood, like if he was in an accident or something, he took his own life. And so he didn't know, and we didn't know how to support him. And, I still think about that night when it happened, and the next morning. And, if there was more that I knew, if I did know what he was going through and what he was thinking, what could I have done different? But it really, I think 2012 really showed me, like, man, life can be really short. And, you know, you have to value the people that you have in your life, and you got to make the most out of each moment. And I would say my faith has definitely taken me a long way. Being kind of physically separated from my mom and my family at that time, and you know, not like just balancing school, getting back to school after taking a year off is always kind of weird. Plus, I was in predominantly white spaces at Laurier, which I wasn't accustomed to at all because I was coming from the States, and my upbringing was being around a lot of people of color. But I just think, you know what, I had everything so routinely planned that I didn't give myself a lot of time to sit and think. So I just kept myself really busy. You know, I would practice. If I wasn't practicing, I was doing my homework, watching the guys practice. If I wasn't doing that, I was doing some other kind of work. I just tried to stay as busy as I could. I think my relationship with God also strengthened a lot of my resilience. And even to this day, like kind of being in rural Nova Scotia and, you know, just out here alone as a Black female, I find I'm getting better at I've always been a little bit of a nomad and kind of on my own, but I think the mentality that I have has really changed, and it's one of productivity. It's one of resilience. You know, this year my church has been talking a lot about revival. That's the theme for this year, and I just feel like there's a lot of great things on the horizon. And I also think, unfortunately, with my brother's passing, I'd mentioned it brought our family together. Like I have a sister who's transgender, and she transitioned right around the same time my brother had passed away. And if you know African families, there's a lot of taboos and stigmas. And I remember having a conversation with my mom, like, listen, like you know what just happened, right? So like we have to, it's not one of those, right? Like it's, you have your people, and like my circle is really small, and you got to love them for who they are. That's all you could do. Like at the end of the day, you could pray for them, you know, sprinkle your holy water, whatever you got to do. But at the end of the day, that's a human being, right? And I think it really changed my mindset, my mom's mindset, my little brother's mindset, and you know, we've been better because of it. I still hold my brother in my memory every day. Every opportunity I have to talk about him and the legacy that he left for our family. Even at Laurier, I think there's an award in his name that's given out annually. With the BCCA, a lot of what I was compelled to do came from my brother's experiences as well, because I didn't understand, as much as we might have had a few conversations about the racism that he experienced, I didn't understand the breadth of it, being a Black man in corporate Canada and what he was going through. I was like, you know, I'm trying to help with the bills. I'm doing this. I'm kind of doing my own thing. And so when George Floyd, so when Ahmaud Arbery passed away last year, he passed away on my birthday. And then George Floyd passed away, I think it was like a day after or a day before my late brother's birthday. And so that kind of affirmed to me that, you know what I mean? Like a lot of this stuff is connecting. I don't believe in coincidences. And I was like, I was even more like encouraged and just ready to roll my sleeves up and get to work. So yeah, my brother's passing was just, you know, it was such a major turning point for me since 2012. But in his, you know, with what he did while he was here and how he supported me and the legacy that he's left, like in my mind, he's never going to be forgotten.
I got one last one just because you're making history. Herstory.
Herstory. Let's go.
Yeah, that's very empowering. Just as a woman myself and someone who identifies as being biracial, and I can really relate to some of your stories that you were talking about, your growing ups and just different life experiences. How, like, for you working with a lot of females, and you know, females find it hard to, well, it is hard to be vocal in certain spaces because you're always going to be dealing with a lot more than if a male stepped in a room and was like, we're doing this, it would just happen. But being a female, sometimes you got to do a lot of different, like another like climbing up the ladder to get there. So being a female yourself and being BIPOC and doing those things, what do you hope for females in the future, the next generations and the now to become?
I think I want girls and women. So firstly, I want more recruitment and retention in sport. So like right now, we're dealing with a huge issue where like 1 in 3 girls just stop playing sports in their teenage years, in their early teenage years. And that's like across the board, across all cultures. So I would really like to see, especially at a co-ed level, especially at a younger level, I'd like to see more things happening in a co-ed space where we're talking about confidence and leadership and, you know, what do barriers look like, and cultural differences. I would like to see these conversations and this kind of engagement happening much earlier, so that women and girls and boys, I guess at that time when they're younger, they're more knowledgeable, they're more self-aware, because I think a lot of it is the not being a self-aware piece. So that's what I would like to see at younger ages. One of the things I've really lucked out with is in my playing and coaching experience, like up until the point I got to St. FX, like I'd always been given a platform to promote, to support, to engage. And I think anyone that is in a position of power should certainly be trying to amplify the voices of those who don't. So as long as I have a platform, and you know, whether it's in my role at St. FX or somewhere else, or even if it's on my own behalf through my social media channels, I think I want to see more encouragement for young girls and young women to speak up. And you know, I just found coaching so many girls from different walks of life, and young women, and even some older women, I think just giving them that reassurance, like it's okay to be unique and be different. Like I am weird AF, like, and I just I've always known I don't know. I just find like the sooner you kind of accept yourself, kind of for what you are, for who you are, then you'll start to feel better about yourself. And you know, that's really important, is making yourself happy. But I think externally, I think everyone has to just be better at accepting people for who they are and encouraging them in their own uniqueness. I don't think it happens enough. I think we're now at an age, I think the last 2 years or so, we see like a lot of like albino models, or like a Winnie, or like, you know what I mean? Like people are really starting to come around. Oh, like that's not a birth defect. Like that's a beauty mark, you know, like, and so I really like that, because the more we can do that, the more people we're going to be saving, the more people we're going to be encouraging, and let them know, like, you're here walking this path on life because you're meant to be different. You know, when I was in high school, I wouldn't wear jeans because like my thighs were way too big. I was like, I'm not going to look like those skinny girls. I used to think about that stuff. If I, you know, and if it wasn't for like my coaches saying, Lee, who cares? You can wear sweats. Like, who cares about that? Like, at the end of the day, you're you. It just meant the world to me, because we don't realize how subconsciously the things that we see online or on our social media, and the people who are amplified, we're always thinking, how do I conform to that? And I think it's less about conforming and more about like really staying true to yourself. But like my job as a coach is to support all of my athletes in that way, or all of my students that I teach in that way. It's okay to be different, right? Like that's not a bad thing. So I like that we're here in society. And I think that's what we need to keep doing for our young girls and our women. And I can't say it hasn't been a challenge. Like even with my brother, who was my sister, like it's hard. Like it's a challenge, right? Because you're just like, it's just, you're unique, you're different. But that's okay. Like we're supposed to be that. And the more that I educate myself spiritually, educationally, like that kind of rings true. So I'm gonna make it a point to kind of keep doing that, you know, bolster my own confidence, I guess, but more importantly for the people I engage with too, like the young women.
Keep making that her story. keep making that her story.
Yo, I know we're at 1 hour, but like, can I squeeze in one more question?
Go ahead, bro.
I know everyone's camera's probably gonna like cut out by the time we get to the end, but this is just something that I have been. We have a couple kids in the community who have transitioned or are transitioning, and over again, the number one barrier I hit is religious based. And I don't think it's necessarily like scripture based. I think it's more like cultural based, because I think religion takes on a different mask depending on what culture is viewing it. So can you maybe just take the listeners through a little bit of the journey of how you squared up with your faith and dealing with your little brother? And I know you had the situation with your brother and that kind of helped you get to a certain place, but was there more that you had to kind of go back to the scripture, go back to a pastor, or even within yourself and just be like, okay, how do I make this work? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's not an easy question to answer.
Yeah.
I just think overall, when I think about my faith, and I'm a Christian, and I'm also Pentecostal, but like the Bible says, we should be treating people how we would want to treat ourselves, and everything is about being a leadership. Everything is about being a leader servant, right? And so we have to make sure that everyone that we come to pass with, that we're accepting of them and we love them. Like that's first and foremost. And that's all we can do. It's not our part to put judgment on people or
Mm.
to be like, well, let me fact check to, page 350. And so to me, everything just comes back to that. I think what's helped for me is as a sport coach, I see a lot of um, analogies and similarities with things that I read in the Bible and the messages that I get from going to church in how we see sport and how we do sport. And so I've been able to, I guess, in a way, contextualize um, being a good Christian with being a good person because of my involvement in sport, if that makes sense. And a lot of it is geared around knowing like there's no success without failure, and knowing that we're always a work in progress, and knowing that no matter what, like I sin, I'm gonna sin again, but that repentance is always there for me. And then most of all, like just loving one another and being able to forgive one another. And I think that last one is the toughest because, like we go through life and like you just don't know why things happen to you or why someone would do something against you. And you can kind of sit and just go through that and it can kind of drive you crazy. But at the end of the day, that only hurts us. If we can't find a way to forgive others, it only hurts us. So going back to the challenges that I think, especially young people, especially young Black people, because if I'm not mistaken, I think there's alarming rates of suicide with to us LGBTQ plus young people who are also Black, who also are coming from like that kind of religious background. And ultimately, I think we got to lead with love. Like
Mm.
that's what it's about. It's got to be acceptance first. Um, it's got to be like we're not in a position to judge at all. I know I definitely am not. And that's a message that I would like to get across to those young people. I've also seen firsthand. I've also experienced firsthand the benefits of mentorship. Like as much as I haven't been able to articulate it and understand it as such, like over the course of my years, I've been mentored for so long, and I didn't even think it was that. I just thought it was checking in. I just thought it was having someone there to talk to. I think there's a lot of power in bringing together people who are struggling with similar things. And again, in the sports space, we've been able to do that as coaches. We've been able to empower athletes doing that. I think for our community, especially for our Black community, and with people who have transitioned or are transitioning, I think being able to connect them to one another would be, I think it would save lives. Honestly, in thinking about my brother Samuel, when he passed away, he actually passed away with a person that I don't even know how long he would have known him, but they both, from a mindset standpoint, were at that point where they felt like they couldn't go anymore, right? And so I think if we aren't proactive in thinking about what these worst case scenarios are, then we're always reactionary. And I'll put my coach hat on. That's like going to a game with no end of game strategy, with no scouting, with no like. So let's work backwards from there. If we're not accepting these kids, if we're not empowering them, if we're not trying to connect them and help them understand that it's okay to be different, listen, you're going to be supported, God loves you, then we have to assume the worst, right? So, yeah, I would really like to see our Black community come together, our religious community come together, and really just talk about how important it is to lead with love first and foremost. That's what we're being called to do, and that's what I would like to do.
Powerful, because
Yeah.
people need to hear that. Like even I identify with the LGBTQ2 plus community, and it is alarming. It is alarming how often this is happening. And it honestly goes back to not having people that they can trust
Mm.
to go to, someone to see them, someone to be like, hey, we love you. Like it just takes that human interaction report. So if anyone's listening out there, if someone's coming to you expressing these shares and where they're at in their life, like, it is about love. It is about seeing them and just respecting their pronouns, calling them by their name. Like, that's a lifesaver. And I get like jittery about it because my voice is a little wavering and I can feel it. But it's something I feel in my soul and in my heart, like, truly. And I really thank you for sharing that, and about your sister, and about, just like how you, like, this is a common, like, how do you deal with that? But just hearing you about saying, like, we all are unique, and we love you, and this is like leading with love. Those are really powerful. And I know that whoever's listening, that will really touch them.
Thank you, Liz. I appreciate it. Thanks for sharing too.
Yeah, thanks for that. Was a loaded question, so I appreciate you taking that one on.
Dylan, you're doing great work, man. I can tell just how much, like, I can see just from this conversation how much you're giving back to the community and how much you genuinely care. So I know the kids, the community kids and youth and even adults that you're working with, like, you're doing God's work. Like, we need like, it's you guys that are doing a lot of the work, right? Like, we get the easy jobs, like, like, just to kind of do what we love, and hopefully, bad things don't happen. And you're like throwing yourself out there, like, listen, I'm about this. I want to support you. I want to help you. I want to leverage whatever I have. So it's really inspiring as well, just to kind of pick up on the things that you're doing for the community.
Damn, thank you. Yo, she flipped it on me. This was supposed to be about you, yo.
Yo, you're in the trenches, bro. The trenches. Wow. Yes.
Thank you.
Embrace your uniqueness and lead with love. Love it. Lee, there's going to be a book written about you. I'm calling it. There's going to be a book written about you. And one day we're going to be reading these, the pages inside this book of Lee Anna Osei, entrepreneur, coach, mentor. While we're reading this book, what words are going to be on the pages that are going to tell us that this woman left an impact on this world? What will those words be? I'm curious.
Think of some adjectives. I would definitely say perseverance. I would definitely say faith. I would definitely say hardship. I would definitely say creativity. And I would also say individualism. And I think the word mentorship, like, I don't know how many times I've thrown that word around. I think part of it is because we run a lot of mentorship programs now formally, and we're trying to. But it's saved my life. I tell you that much, because it's allowed me access to people, to talk to them, to get encouragement, for them to ask questions. And I just find, like, there's no way I'm here without the quote unquote village that helped me get here. So I definitely want to pay it forward. I really feel like God put me on this earth to lead through sport. And it's crazy because every year it feels like it's like in some other capacity. And half the time I feel like I don't know what is this direction that I'm supposed to be going in? But since I was young, like, I remember when I was in high school, and I had to live on like $20 a week. Like, I had to make a choice. Either it was going to go towards Patty and Pop, or it was going to go to busking.
Like, that just brought me back. Oh,
yeah. And a little chubby drink.
Yeah, the chubbies. And they explode.
Yeah, Downland Station, Patty and Pop, like, but I always remember telling myself, and at that time, like I mentioned, I wasn't living at home. I was bouncing around quite a bit. I literally would walk around. I would have my book, and I would have my basketball. And at one point, I was like reading my Bible, so that was my book, and I would have my basketball. And I said, these two things. I just prayed. I said, these two things I feel like are where my future is gonna be. And I just kind of get I get chills just thinking about it, because I feel like it was yesterday. Like, I can look back and kind of see myself, like riding that subway train. But I'm just going to keep going and keep trying to connect people, keep trying to empower people, encourage people. I think that's the greatest gift that you can leave here on earth, is like people are remembering you for the good that you did for others. Like that's how I want to be remembered.
Preach.
You should call that book The Train of My Life.
Mm.
Just have that like the Toronto train or something. I don't know. Like I just pictured this book with a train in the front, and that's the start.
We're writing these down.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just give a shout out to Perspektiv podcast.
Definitely. Thank you guys so much for this chat. It's been really nice. This is like my first one I've done in a while, like in terms of just jumping on and talking. I've kind of had my head buried the last few weeks with the lockdown and stuff, so it's always nice to just chop it up.
Yo, you've also been the this is the longest running podcast we've ever had. We just broke a record here.
Yeah, officially. I was thinking the same thing. Hey, I said we are gonna finish off with a bang. Let's go. Way to hold it down, Lee. Lee, thank you so much for your time, for your stories, for your perspective, and we just thank you for you definitely gave us a lot of value through this hour and 11 minutes that we truly appreciate. And if you enjoyed what you watched, make sure you like, comment, share, and subscribe. And on that note, Dylan, take me with the outro.
All right. Well, Lee, appreciate you being here. And thanks for tuning in, everybody. That wraps up season 2. Yo, why do you guys still let me do this? All right. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. That wraps up season 2 of the Perspektiv podcast. Hey, remember, this is just our perspective on mentoring. What's yours? See you for season 3, coming at a date we didn't decide yet, but see y'all later.